Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Heather Goodell. Soy jefa de la unidad de cambio climático en la Embajada Británica en Santiago. Damos comienzo al cuarto webinar del ciclo enmarcado en la agenda de la Mesa Público-Privada de Finanzas Verdes de Chile, liderada por el Ministerio de Hacienda. El objetivo del ciclo de webinars es generar conocimiento y intercambio de experiencias a nivel nacional e internacional sobre los riesgos y oportunidades asociados al cambio climático para el sistema financiero. El webinar a continuación tratará sobre las recomendaciones del Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, mejor conocido como TCFD, desde una perspectiva aplicada y la relación con los factores ASG, en específico para el sector de pensiones. Para su información, este webinar será grabado y lo dejaremos disponible en la página web de la mesa mfbcorta.hacienda.cl y en la página de YouTube del Ministerio de Hacienda. También encontrarán la agenda en la sección de documentos del panel de esta plataforma. Para dar la bienvenida a este seminario, dejamos con ustedes a Andrés Pérez, Coordinador de Finanzas Internacionales y Jefe de Asesores del Ministerio de Hacienda. Andrés.
Muchas gracias, Heather. Muy buenos días y bienvenido al ciclo de capacitaciones que son parte de la agenda de la Mesa Público-Privada de Finanzas Verdes. Me gustaría agradecer en particular a David Farrar, gerente senior de Políticas y Gobernanza Climática, y a ASG del Departamento de Trabajo y Pensiones del Reino Unido, y también a Sergio Aratangy, jefe de la División Financiera de la Superintendencia de Pensiones, por las exposiciones que realizarán el día de hoy. Me gustaría, asimismo, reconocer el apoyo relevante del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, de UNEP-FI y de la Embajada Británica, que han contribuido a que este ciclo sea posible. El cambio climático dejó de ser un tema únicamente ambiental y actualmente sus impactos están teniendo efectos en múltiples dimensiones, tanto económica, social y financiera. Por esto, desacoplar el crecimiento económico de las emisiones y adaptarnos a los nuevos escenarios climáticos se constituye en un gran desafío en el que necesitaremos de un sistema financiero resiliente y que demuestre proactividad para identificar los riesgos climáticos y ambientales y de esta forma evitar caer en la trampa de retornos para hoy y costos y eventuales inestabilidad para mañana, especialmente considerando el largo plazo de las inversiones de los fondos de pensiones. Al mismo tiempo, transitar hacia una economía sostenible abre diversas oportunidades de inversión. En este desafío, tenemos el convencimiento de que la coordinación a todo nivel será esencial. Y es por ello que desde el Ministerio de Hacienda, el año pasado convocamos una mesa público-privada de finanzas verdes, entre varias otras iniciativas que estamos liderando desde el mismo Ministerio de Hacienda. La mesa está conformada por los actores públicos y privados del sector financiero de Chile, con representantes tanto del gobierno, de la banca, de los inversionistas, de los aseguradores y de los reguladores financieros. El año pasado, en el marco de la mesa, hubo dos hitos importantes. Primero, se publicó por primera vez una declaración de la autoridad financiera respecto del vínculo entre el cambio climático y el sistema financiero. Y segundo, todos los integrantes de la mesa suscribieron un acuerdo verde voluntario que define los principios y compromisos que guiarán al sector financiero en la identificación, gestión y divulgación de los riesgos y oportunidades asociados al cambio climático en la toma de decisiones. El objetivo de este año es empezar a ejecutar, a implementar dicho acuerdo, y para ello la generación de conocimiento en estas materias es fundamental. Esperamos que este ciclo de encuentros les sea de utilidad y podamos ir avanzando de forma organizada y gradual en el tiempo. Muchas gracias por su atención y les dejo con los presentadores. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Andrés, por tus palabras. A continuación, escucharemos a David Farrar, gerente senior de Políticas, Gobernanza Climática y ASG del Departamento de Trabajo y Pensiones del Reino Unido. David ha trabajado en el Departamento de Trabajo y Pensiones desde 2003 y en Políticas de Pensiones para el Trabajo desde 2014. Actualmente, David lidera el trabajo del Departamento de Trabajo y Pensiones sobre el riesgo de cambio climático en el proyecto de ley de pensiones. Además, está a cargo de la integración de gobernanza climática y el TCFD en la toma de decisiones sobre los planes de pensiones. La presentación de David y el subsiguiente espacio para preguntas se realizarán en inglés y luego cambiaremos al español. David, thank you for joining us today. The floor is now yours, and please, as you present, all participants can ask any questions in the chat box.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all for dialing in to listen to this. So I'm starting with slide 1. Those are my contact details. I'm painfully conscious I'm speaking to you in my first language, but you're listening in a second or further language. If you have any, as I think Heather has said, there will be a translation to follow. Also, if you have any further questions you want to follow up about, do feel free to either raise them on the chat box, and I can try and answer them at the end, or if you want to email me later on, my email address is listed there. I'm going to move on to slide 2 now, which is the outline of what I'm going to cover. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about the UK pension system. I think from some of my early conversations with the organisers of this session, I've realised that there are many differences between the UK and those of Chile. So it would just be helpful probably for you to understand sometimes the differences that have led us to do things that may be not necessary or not useful for to happen in your regulatory environment. Then I'll spend more of the session, probably about half of it, talking about the PC RIG, the Pensions Climate Risk Industry Group, of which I've been a member, which has produced guidance called Aligning Your Pension Scheme with TCFD Recommendations. And then towards the end of the session, I will tell you a little bit about our next steps and our coming steps towards making TCFD disclosures mandatory for UK occupational pension schemes. I'll move on to slide 3 now. So this is just a quick overview of the UK pension system. We have a state pension, which it's a combination of contributory and non-contributory elements. If you reach the maximum level, then if you earn an income of around £8,000 per year or $10,000 US as state pension. That's well, not very generous compared with some jurisdictions, but relatively generous compared with others. Many savers are dependent on private pension wealth for any additional savings they have. Under the UK system called automatic enrolment, most people are now automatically enrolled into an occupational pension, although that only has minimum total contributions combined from employer, employee, and from tax relief, adding up to 8% of earnings. And it's not even 8% of all earnings; it's 8% of a band of earnings. So private pensions are an addition to income that's earned from the state pension, but it's not. Members probably have to do some additional saving or have additional wealth in order to have a truly comfortable standard of living in retirement. I'm going to leave aside state pension now, move on to slide 4, where I talk about the private pension system in the UK. The UK has quite a complex system of dual regulation for workplace pension saving. I don't think we would necessarily start from here in setting up a UK system, but this is how things have evolved over time. The majority of people saving into a pension today through their employer are doing so through an occupational trust-based scheme. So that's the type of scheme that's shown on the left. We've had a long history of defined benefit pension schemes, but now relatively few people are actively saving into defined benefit pensions, although many do have some wealth in closed defined benefit pensions. Most savers are saving into occupational trust-based schemes through the workplace. There is another type of pension, though, called a group personal pension, which is subject to a different regulatory regime. It has different oversight from the Treasury instead of DWP, and the Financial Conduct Authority, or FCA, instead of the pensions regulator. Those are called personal pension schemes. And then finally, on the far right, there are regular personal pensions, individual personal pensions, which are predominantly used by self-employed people. just to spend a moment to explain the different systems here. On the left-hand side, these schemes are trust-based. So what that means is that they're overseen by a group of trustees who have a fiduciary duty to the savers. The savers don't have any form of contract into the scheme. They are beneficiaries of a trust, and this is a very long tradition in the UK, and I know in some other countries, of a trust-based financial system, which is quite flexible. It doesn't come with very many contractual or any contractual terms and conditions, but comes with a broad test called fiduciary duty, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes' time. Personal pension schemes don't have, there isn't a fiduciary duty of the same kind in relation to those schemes. There is a contract between the pension saver and the pension provider. Because this is quite an uneven contract, the pension provider has quite a lot of power. The pension saver is an ordinary person like you or me, and doesn't therefore understand all of the minutiae of all the clauses of contractual terms. Then there are a number of contractual protections and a lot of additional consumer protections that are put in place in personal pensions in order to protect members' savings. I'm only going to talk about the types of scheme on the left-hand side, though, the occupational trust-based schemes, which are the type of scheme that the Department for Work and Pensions is responsible for. So I'll move on to slide 5 now, and this just gives you some headline figures. So the UK does have a lot of savings in pensions wealth, around $2 trillion US dollars, 1.6 trillion UK pounds are in private sector defined benefit schemes, and a much smaller proportion, only around 120 billion pounds or 150 billion US dollars, are in occupational defined contribution schemes. So even though most people are saving into defined contribution schemes, they haven't been saving for so long that those savings, that the savings in those types of schemes have caught up or got even close to catching up with defined benefit schemes. We also have a very fragmented system. I heard that in Chile you have a much more concentrated system, a very small number of providers. We have 5,500 defined benefit pension schemes, 3,200 occupational defined contribution schemes, and around 2,000 different types of contract-based schemes. So this is a very fragmented system with many different providers working in the marketplace, and that probably affects our pension system quite fundamentally in a way that doesn't affect others. I think the only jurisdictions that I'm aware of that have more pension schemes than the UK are Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, which is taking very severe, very drastic measures to try and reduce the number of schemes, and I think South Africa have slightly more pension schemes than we do. But other than that, we have the second highest saving and the third highest numbers of schemes, which isn't necessarily anything to boast about. If I move on to the trustees' duties under law and the kind of concept of fiduciary duty, this isn't set out in statute, but in case law. There isn't a lot of legislation that one can point at which tells pension scheme trustees what they should do in relation to actually making investment decisions. There's quite a few things that tell pension scheme trustees about the kind of governance mechanisms they should have in place, or the kinds of things that they should report to pension schemes, and the kinds of policies. But there isn't really anything in pensions law that tells people in broad terms how they should treat pension savers. But these are some ideas which have been informed by case law, by legal cases over the last few hundred years. So one of them is acting in members' best interests, of undivided loyalty to the best interests of members. Acting in accordance with the prudent person principle, which means exercising their powers with care, skill, and diligence that a prudent person would exercise when dealing with investments for someone else for whom they feel morally bound to provide. what this means, and this has come through a couple of reports which have been published by the UK government's legal advisors called the Law Commission, is that trustees do have a duty which is reflected in their fiduciary duty to take account of all financially material risks and opportunities. And so those include some familiar things which I've listed there, so exchange rate risks, counterparty risks if you're lending, if you're investing in other organizations, bonds, similarly interest rates or inflation are all traditional risks. But it also does mean that wherever they are financially material, then trustees should also be taking account of ESG risks and in particular climate change. Government hasn't said that those risks will always be financially material, but we have set out the clear expectation that most of the time, at least some of those risks will be financially material. And we think there is a very strong argument that climate change in particular is a very real material risk to pension schemes members' savings. I'll move on to slide 7. So in terms of how, I'm going to now talk about the PC RIG guidance and how we got here. In the Green Finance Strategy, which was published in July of last year by government, these are 2 extracts from that report. Government did formally endorse the TCFD recommendations in September 2017, but relatively few people, at least initially, have taken up TCFD. There was only a relatively small number of companies disclosing TCFD in full, or a relatively few asset managers and a very small number of occupational pension schemes, although all of those numbers are increasing. In the strategy, we essentially we sat on the fence somewhat. There was some. This is climate change in the UK government is something where many government departments have a voice, and there was a slight divergence of voices. So rather than come down strictly in terms of saying TCFD should be made mandatory or that TCFD should remain voluntary, we instead set out an expectation that all listed companies and large asset owners would be disclosing in line with the TCFD recommendations by 2022. And in order to assist with that process, we announced that we were going to take action to support the implementation of TCFD through guidance. Government and the pensions regulator, the supervisory body for occupational pension schemes, jointly established an industry group to develop TCFD guidance for schemes. And that is the PC RIG, Pensions Climate Risk Industry Group. So I'll move to slide 8. This is just the membership of the TCFD, a very diverse range of organisations. I imagine some of these will be familiar, but not all of them. In terms of government, the involvement included DWP, the body responsible for legislating for occupational schemes, the pensions regulator, the body for supervising pension schemes, and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is the government department responsible for climate change in the UK government. But we also included a number of pension schemes who are listed there, a number of consultants such as Aon and Willis Towers Watson, and a number of, I think, what we might call civil society bodies, such as Client Earth, Client Earth, which is an environmental law firm, Share Action, which is a kind of pension savers campaigning charity, and some other bodies like the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, which are kind of non-state organisations but standard-setting bodies. If you're contemplating doing something similar in Chile, then I think getting civil society bodies on board is a great way of making things actually happen. I think if I had one insight to share on our experience of the group was, when people realised we were talking about voluntary guidance, everybody wanted to be on the board and to be on the group that was assisting with it. People weren't very strongly minded one way or the other around, there weren't lots of quarrels or disagreements between members of the group about the approach that we should take, but it is quite difficult when you're trying to motivate people who have day jobs, who are trying to produce guidance elsewhere, or trying to do other jobs as part of their day-to-day business, to actually make time to write this. And a lot of the time where we ended up when it came down to writing the actual guidance, it rested on a few people. They were the lawyers in the group, some government departments, some trade bodies, and especially relatively expert civil society members who saw this as an opportunity to kind of influence what pension schemes should be doing. I'll move on to slide 9. So this is quite a these are all the kind of considerations that we tried to follow, but rather than run through all of these in detail, I'm just going to kind of draw out a few themes. So the first theme I think to draw out is that, at least for occupational pension schemes in the UK, where really you could see occupational pension schemes as really just very big baskets of assets. The trustees don't really do anything apart from oversee the assets of the scheme. They haven't got other businesses. They might, as individuals, serve on other boards, but they don't actually have any other business. The sponsors of the schemes may have other businesses, but the trustees do not. And what we realized that there was actually quite a lot of complexity for occupational pension schemes in mapping over those TCFD requirements into pension schemes. There are huge strengths in TCFD in its adaptability to all types of firms, but it can make implementation confusing. Governance and risk management for occupational pension schemes do prove slightly hard to distinguish for pension schemes, rather more so than they do for other firms. We wanted to try and produce guidance that presented the TCFD recommendations in a way which actually goes with the grain of trustee decision making, which reflects and matches the way that they actually set out investment principles, create portfolios, and then review and monitor those. The second point to bring out is that, obviously, recognising the UK market, we have considerably less economy and scale in our market. Many pension schemes have very little resource, and they are very dependent on the services provided by investment consultants and by investment managers. There's much less one-to-one supervision of pension schemes in the UK than I imagine there is in Chile or in other markets where there's much more consolidation. Another thing to note, I think, as a difference between the UK and Chile, is that we are much less prescriptive about the types of investment that pension schemes can invest in. Pension schemes have to invest in the best interests of members and beneficiaries, their fiduciary duty. They have to think about factors like security, the quality of the portfolio, the liquidity of the portfolio. But beyond that, there are very few other restrictions. The only restrictions are really that the assets of the scheme must consist predominantly of investments which are traded on regulated markets. You can still invest in unregulated investments, but only to a prudent level. And there are also some restrictions on investments in derivatives, but those aren't very restrictive at all in fact. So we have to kind of try and create some guidance to nudge a very large number of occupational pension schemes with relatively limited governance budgets to start thinking about this, to move from a position of very little engagement with the topics to starting to think about it. They're in a very different place from the case studies that you'll sometimes see that are produced by other bodies. So, for instance, the PRI and the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, or IIGCC, which has produced guidance on TCFD and on scenario analysis. Those often cite a lot of European and other international examples where pension schemes have many more assets, much more resource to do things themselves. We've tried to create guidance that actually works for schemes irrespective of the level of resources they have. So, for instance, reminding people about the availability of free scenario analysis tools that trustees can use themselves, just questions they can ask asset managers about how they do TCFD, because ultimately the climate risk of an occupational pension scheme is an aggregation of the occupational pension schemes of the underlying funds, which are themselves an aggregation of the climate risk of the underlying assets in each of those funds. So we didn't want trustees to think they necessarily had to pay intermediaries for lots of extra analysis, although they could do. We were trying to give them space to actually do things themselves and start to actually think about this process. A third consideration was that it's very easy to start viewing TCFD as just another load of disclosures, that these are things that pension schemes have to report to a lot of members, some of whom are very interested in this, but many of whom aren't really very interested and aren't really going to act on the findings. What we tried to bring out in the guidance, and we'll do in the legislation, is that the TCFD, it's not so much about, the disclosures are important because they show your workings, they show what you actually did, but in fact it's going through the process of thinking about TCFD and doing the governance to get you to the point where you can make disclosures that's most important. So the guidance is structured around the thinking which schemes need to do with the disclosures as the end result. The final point I'll just make on this one is that we do recognise that certain parts of TCFD are difficult. Scenario analysis and metrics such as greenhouse gas emissions they're simple principles, but it's quite difficult well, there are two difficulties with it. One is there are lots and lots of scenarios, there are lots of possible metrics. We've tried to indicate particular scenarios and metrics that trustees should think about. And finally, that we do recognise that the level of disclosure of data from upstream, from asset managers and from listed firms, is quite different. It's not subject. It's not necessarily consistent. Asset managers might do TCFD disclosures, but they might do so on different scenarios from one another. They might make different assumptions in those scenarios. So we've allowed people some flexibility, but we've tried to nudge people to think about the core things that they should be thinking about. Oh yeah, sorry, on the slide that you're looking at now, then that's really showing the mapping of the of TCFD requirements to a typical pension trustee decision-making process, setting out your beliefs, then developing a strategy that reflects those beliefs, and then reviewing and monitoring that with stewardship and the role of investment consultants sitting alongside. I'll move on to slide 11. So this is the guidance. This imaginatively has exactly the same cover as the Green Finance Strategy, although with a different logo in the bottom right-hand corner and a different title in the top left. But we've tried to structure this so that in part one, we're giving people the background to TCFD, reminding people why this is important. And then in part two, taking people through that process where they will meet all of the TCFD requirements, but they do so in a way which feels more logical for the investment decision-making process. And then in part three, we set out some technical considerations that pension schemes will have to consider as part of meeting their duties, in particular on the two hardest areas, scenario analysis on the one hand, and metrics and targets on the other. I'm going to move on to slide 12.
Yep, 5 minutes remaining, David.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so I'll be very quick on this one, and then I can spend a bit of time on legislation. So these are the scenarios that we ended up prescribing, and I think this is the kind of emerging standard. It's 2 below 2 degree scenarios of an orderly transition and an abrupt transition to get trustees to think about both, and a no transition scenario. Whilst you can do lots of scenarios in between, ultimately those are just mixtures of the two scenarios. 2 degrees or lower has lots of transition risk, very little physical risk. 4 degrees has obviously no transition risk, a lot of transition risk. So it's quite helpful to bring out those two opposite ends of the spectrum. And on metrics and targets, we talked about both outcome targets and we talked about process targets. It's not just about the greenhouse gas emissions. It's also about the steps that you're taking to get to fuller disclosure of those, or to get trustees to or to get investment managers to factor climate risk into their decision making. We'll publish our slide 13. We'll publish our consultation closes next month. We expect to publish final guidance in the 4th quarter, so between October and December of this year. I'll move on to slide 14. So recently, DWP, as part of the government, has tabled an amendment to a pension schemes bill, which is going through our Houses of Parliament at the moment, to introduce new requirements on occupational pension schemes, to actually put in place necessary governance requirements to take account of climate change, and to which will essentially require them to carry out the TCFD requirements around governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, and and also to disclose publicly by publishing an annual TCFD report how they have done so. This is getting reasonably wide support. There are a group of MPs who would like us to be more radical, to start prescribing how schemes should invest, for instance, to require them to invest for 2 degrees of global warming, to be Paris aligned. There are another group of MPs who would like us to be considerably less radical and think that we're prioritising climate change above everything else. We're trying to tread a kind of a middle road between those paths, not directing pension schemes, but nudging them to think about this in the hope that this will encourage them to mitigate the climate risk that they are ultimately exposing their savers to. Slide 15. So I suppose thought it was helpful to say a little bit about why we are doing this. I think we've sensed that we're reaching the end of what we can do voluntarily. The Minister wrote to the 50 largest pension schemes in last year, and we found that well over half of those schemes had no intention of doing TCFD within the next 12 months in any form. So we've sensed that probably the coalition of the willing has exceeded, has reached its maximum, and we need to actually get all schemes to now be thinking about doing this. Nationally, there is the Green Finance Strategy expectation to meet, and internationally, I think the UK hosting COP26 now next year rather than later this year provides a lot of pressure on the UK government to show that it's actually doing something in this space. I've summarised briefly what the legislation does there, but I think I've also covered that a moment before. I'm going to spend just the final, I think I've probably got about a minute, haven't I? So I'll just spend a few seconds on this remaining slide and a few seconds on slide 16. On slide 15, I think one of the questions that always comes up here is data and the lack of availability of data. At the moment, if you can imagine an investment chain as starting with listed firms, with issuers of equity and debt. Those UK firms don't currently have a duty to do TCFD, but the relevant authority has consulted on giving them a duty to do TCFD on a comply or explain basis, and we expect those rules to come into force sometime next year. There are no duties yet on asset managers to do TCFD, which means that there is a slight mismatch here in some of the timing. We're requiring pension schemes to do TCFD in advance of getting all of the data that they might need to do that perfectly from asset managers. So we're requiring them to do it as far as they are able, in quotes, when the data might not be available. And we recognise this as a long-term problem because many UK pension schemes only invest around 25 or 30% of their assets in the UK. They're exposed to many international markets where there aren't requirements on listed issuers to do TCFD, and there won't be for many years to come. We don't think this is a huge problem ultimately, though. If I go to slide 16, the only shaded out areas there are the data that pension scheme, are the TCFD requirements where pension scheme trustees really need the data. We're starting with the very larger schemes, so we anticipate that the larger schemes will have the buying power to obtain data from investment managers where that data is available. But we fully accept that scenario analysis isn't going to be based on 100% of the assets. Greenhouse gas emission totals are not going to be based on 100% of the assets in the first instance. And it's going to be a long haul to get us to 100% of the assets. But we don't see the reason that we can't wait for every other jurisdiction in the world that pension schemes might be invested in to do the necessary, to legislate for the necessary disclosures. So we're starting now on the basis that the 7 disclosures there which don't rely on data are actually still important for occupational pension schemes, and many of them still have more they can do in those areas under governance, strategy and risk management. Just show you the final slide, 17, which shows our future timescale. But I will end there and be interested in hearing any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for your wonderful presentation and for really going into detail as well, not only in the context, but the in-depth process of the consultation, the domestic point of view, but then also the international point of view. And it is true that green finance will be one of the main campaigns for the COP26 as we move forward to Glasgow next year. We'll now start the Q&A session with David in response to some of the questions raised in the chat. Ahora abrimos un espacio para que David responda a las consultas que nos fueron llegando por el chat y por interno. So David, I'll kick off the first question, and I think
Sure.
it'd be great to hear if you believe that managing climate risk is a fiduciary duty, and if so, why?
Absolutely. We do think it's a fiduciary duty for occupational pension scheme trustees. We think it is a financially material risk. As I mentioned, I'm very happy to send links to these reports if these would be useful to people. The Law Commission, our legal advisors, published reports in 2014 and in 2017 that said trustees have got a legal duty to consider all financially material risks, whatever their source. So it's less of a question about whether climate change is, as part of fiduciary duty, but whether climate change is a financially material risk. I think it would feel self-evident that in some circumstances, at least, climate change is a financially material risk. And many of you will be familiar, with the fact that many firms' pricing on their valuations is predicated on fossil fuel assets that actually aren't can't be extracted and can't be burnt in a 2-degree or less world. So there are clearly questions that have been, that have to be asked about the valuations of those firms and about the processes that those firms are taking to actually reduce the climate risk to investors that is involved in owning those. That's the reason I think we home in on climate change above other aspects of ESG, because we think that climate change feels that the market has only priced in perhaps 3 degrees of global warming rather than 2 degrees or less of global warming. So there is an evident mismatch in the valuation of assets and the necessary steps that government is committed to, governments of the world are committed to and must take. That's less obvious in relation to things like fair treatment of workers, in quality of governance, in other environmental issues, but certainly we are entirely supportive of trustees who decide that any of those issues are financially material and wish to take account of those too.
Great, thank you. And another question, and I know you explained a little bit, but if you could go a bit more in detail around what are the main challenges for pension funds in terms of climate risk assessment. I know you mentioned a bit about data, but it'd be great if you could go into more detail.
So I think data is a problem. I mean, I didn't say much about this, but we're starting. I think we have something like 400 pension schemes that have more than 1 billion in assets. That's the kind of threshold that we're starting with to begin with, of the kinds of schemes that we would expect to be doing TCFD by the end of 2022. We think that those schemes have got access to, they have strong relationships with their investment managers who actually do their investment for them. They have considerable buying power and are therefore able to obtain, to get asset managers who perhaps previously haven't done TCFD for them to go the extra mile and actually analyse the portfolios on their behalf. And that they should be able to do that at low cost because the asset managers are incentivised to keep that business. But I think the kinds of data that that pension scheme trustees ultimately need, at least, or the areas where we acknowledge that they've got difficulties, are in emissions, in particular Scope 3 emissions, and in the scenario analysis where there are clearly limitations to the kind of quality of disclosures that are coming from issuers. My take would be that pension scheme trustees, as the ultimate asset owners, are able to kind of communicate their demand for this information through the investment chain via asset managers to companies to actually start improving, raising their game and doing these kinds of disclosures more effectively. We still recognise that the UK is a relatively small economy in this whole in the whole picture of international investment, and so there are areas in which UK asset owners and asset managers won't have a huge amount of leverage over their over the firms in whom they invest, but there obviously will be circumstances in which they do have significant leverage. By giving trustees a duty to ask for this information, we think that we will start to unlock some of those barriers and actually get firms to start to report. An example that's often given to us is private equity, where this data is apparently very difficult to gain from private equity. Well, we have slight difficulty with this because private equity tends to obviously have much more concentrated ownership than listed firms, which might have many hundreds or thousands of owners. It should be reasonably straightforward for asset owners, for pension schemes who have a duty to carry out scenario analysis and report on other metrics as far as they're able, to make getting the investee firms to actually do that analysis on their behalf as a condition of investing, to enable them to fill in that blank, to be able to do TCFD in relation to unlisted firms. I think a lot of this is not so. I'm very definitely not going to say this is a situation in Chile, but in the UK, there's a lot. There can often be a lot of accentuating the negatives and not really thinking about the positives. The fact that there are some gaps mean that we shouldn't really be thinking about doing this now. But we have a clear idea, and there's been lots of research by many consultancies and other firms that show the kinds of sectors that will suffer in a transition to a low carbon environment. We know the firms who are dealing with those transitions better, and we know the firms who are dealing with those transitions worse. It isn't necessarily crucial to know how much worse or how much better you're going to deal with those situations in order to know which one you want to invest your money in.
Well, and that's a really great segue into our next question, actually. If you have any examples of pension companies that are implementing the TCFD in good practice.
Yes, so I mean, I can certainly send you some reports of those. That would be no problem. We have the largest UK defined contribution scheme, which you might have heard of, called NEST, the National Employment Savings Trust, which is a kind of an arm's length body of the government and serves predominantly low-waged employers in the UK. Are now doing, I think, their second or third TCFD report. The HSBC staff pension scheme, so HSBC, obviously a very big employer in the UK and elsewhere, have been real trailblazers in TCFD, and the university superannuation scheme, which is the which is the pension scheme for UK university employees, have also been very active. Very happy, Heather, to send you links to their recent reports after this call if that's useful, and you can add those to the webinar summary.
Great, thank you. And we have time for one more question, but just to say we will be sharing, and thank you very much, David, for sharing your contact details. So if others have questions afterwards, please feel free to contact David, and equally on the reports that David just mentioned. The last and final question I have is, do you have any estimation of how much it will cost companies to evaluate climate risks in their portfolios? And this in regards to monetary risks and time risks.
No, I don't have data on the amount it costs companies. We have done analysis of the amount that it costs pension schemes, so I'll share those informally. These aren't necessarily final numbers that will go into our impact assessment that we're required to publish, but those are of the order of about they're not as much as you might think. What we argue, can we just go back, Heather, to the previous slide? I think it is. Is that okay? If you've got that available. So all of those requirements, so I'm not sure if I've quite highlighted this slide exactly correctly. I will send you a revised version, but all of the requirements in relation to governance, most of the requirements in relation to strategy, and all the requirements in relation to risk management, we think these are part of trustees' fiduciary duty to manage these things. We don't think these are costs that we should be worrying unduly about. If trustees of pension schemes haven't spent the money on doing these things, they should spend the money on doing it now, because they're not actually complying fully with their legal duties if they haven't done that. We think there is a cost of documenting perhaps those policies or reporting back on how you've done those things, but we don't think there should be any cost to companies of actually complying with the basics of their legal duties. In relation to scenario analysis of metrics, our cost suggests that this isn't as much as people might think. It's often bundled with services if trustees ask for them. So the kind of estimates that we have are of the order of £15,000 to £20,000, that's 20 to 25,000 US dollars. per pension scheme.
Great. Well, thank you very much, David, for all of your reflections and for your time today. And with that, we'll now switch back into Spanish. Thank you very much, David.
No problem. Thank you all. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bueno, para continuar, invitamos a Sergio Aratangy, jefe de la División Financiera de la Superintendencia de Pensiones, quien presentará sobre la perspectiva chilena desde el ente regulador en esas materias. Sergio.
Okay, buenos días a todos. Thank you very much, David, for your presentation. Let me share. I hope everybody can see my presentation now. Okay. So, perdón. Lo que vamos a hablar va a ser básicamente cómo estamos nosotros en la Superintendencia de Pensiones viendo la evaluación de los riesgos, tanto ASG como de riesgo de cambio climático, dentro del modelo de pensiones que tenemos. Entonces, lo que vamos a hablar va a ser primero cómo es nuestro modelo de supervisión basado en riesgo, que es un enfoque preventivo, porque por ahí estamos haciendo nuestra actuación en esta área. Después, nuestra visión respecto a estos temas, un poco de las observaciones que hemos hecho a las administradoras, pero algo muy poco específico, porque tiene que ser así. Los próximos pasos y las conclusiones, algunas breves conclusiones. Quiero dejar, si posible, espacio a las preguntas. Entonces, empecemos con el modelo SVR. Ese es un modelo preventivo que nosotros ya estamos aplicando desde 2010, ya tiene 10 años. Está basado en una resolución de una norma de carácter general. La resolución muestra más o menos cómo nosotros trabajamos, no es una norma para los demás, es una obligación de nosotros y la norma define lo que los demás deben hacer. Además, nosotros tenemos un modelo que explicita buenas prácticas en la administración de riesgo y que son aplicables desde el comienzo de 2018. En esta documentación se definen para las administradoras de fondos de pensión 4 objetivos básicos. Y esos son la calidad y oportunidad de los beneficios, la calidad y oportunidad de la información y del servicio a los usuarios, la rentabilidad y seguridad de los fondos de pensiones y de los fondos de cesantía, y la adecuada administración de las cuentas personales. Entendiendo eso, nosotros tenemos que el modelo de supervisión es que cada entidad, cada fiscalizado reconozca como propios estos objetivos y gestionen los riesgos que amenacen el cumplimiento de cualquiera de ellos. Definimos también 9 categorías generales de riesgo. Riesgo de crédito, que incluye riesgo de contraparte, mercado, liquidez, fiduciario, operacional, legal y normativo, estratégico, reputacional. Reputacional incluye la materialización de cualquiera de los otros riesgos y algo más. Y además, conducta de mercado. Ese es un proceso anual que tiene cada año diferentes enfoques y esos enfoques se dan en función del historial de cada una de las administradoras y de los temas contingentes, ¿cierto? De algo que se levante como un riesgo probable en el futuro cercano. Nosotros hacemos observaciones de eventuales debilidades en los procesos, no administramos los procesos, pero eventualmente podemos impartir instrucciones en el caso de que las entidades supervisadas no corrijan las debilidades que encontramos. El resultado de la evaluación global de cada administradora individualmente son notificados a la entidad, se hace una reunión con el directorio, se hace un informe bastante extenso que se llama resumen de evaluación de riesgo y todo eso, toda la información levantada y procesada tiene carácter reservado por ley. Nosotros ocupamos para hacer esa evaluación el modelo de 3 líneas de defensa, muy rápidamente, que tiene una estructura de gobierno corporativo, ¿cierto? Que tiene ahí el directorio y la alta administración. Después, la primera línea de defensa, que son los dueños del proceso, son los responsables por ejecutarlo, hacen la gestión y el control interno del proceso y por lo tanto tienen que evaluar los riesgos. La segunda línea de defensa es la línea que hace la gestión de riesgos y por lo tanto son como asesores para la primera línea de defensa. Y la tercera línea de defensa es la auditoría interna. Todo eso bajo la responsabilidad del gobierno corporativo. Un poco de nuestra visión, ¿cierto? Entonces, dentro de los objetivos estratégicos que mencionamos, está la adecuada rentabilidad y seguridad de los fondos de pensiones. Entonces, por ahí hicimos nuestro acercamiento al tema. El proceso asociado, básicamente, es inversión de los fondos. Y ahí tomamos dos subprocesos: la toma de decisión de inversión y la medición, control, seguimiento y reporte de los riesgos financieros. Inicialmente, empezó ya hace varios años, la evaluación de gobiernos corporativos de las compañías. ¿Cierto? Ese era el riesgo, digamos, dentro del ASG, ¿cierto? El G. Luego, los demás criterios de sustentabilidad y la evaluación de los emisores. Y eso siempre con ese, ¿cierto?, risk approach. Finalmente, desde el año pasado, se está incorporando el riesgo climático en el proceso de inversión y no solo él, pero conjunto con las variables de ESG, y eso debe estar dentro de las políticas de inversión. Pasó a ser parte del contenido mínimo de las políticas de inversión. La idea es que estos factores, tanto los ESG como el cambio climático, son esenciales para la evaluación de riesgos y de los flujos de las inversiones a largo plazo. Claro que eso depende del objeto de inversión, de cómo se está haciendo, de cuál es el plazo que se quiere, pero de alguna forma, dentro del proceso, eso tiene que estar evaluado, aunque sea para concluir que no son relevantes, pero tiene que estar evaluado. Uno de los principales problemas que tenemos es que falta información de calidad y homogénea que permita un tratamiento más amplio y que se pueda componer dentro de un portafolio tan complejo como son los portafolios de los fondos de pensión, cuál es el impacto que tendría eso en el portafolio. Pero de cualquier forma, aunque la información no sea completa, para nosotros no evaluar es un riesgo muy grande para las inversiones. Eventualmente se puede estar equivocando en el riesgo mismo o el valor de los activos por no incluir los posibles impactos, ¿cierto? Tanto de los riesgos principalmente los riesgos de transición en este caso. ¿Ok? Ahora, de lo que hemos observado a las administradoras. Como comenté antes, no podemos ser específicos, ¿cierto? Porque eso tiene sigilo, pero básicamente se ha observado la necesidad de una correcta construcción de valor, es decir, incluir estos factores como factores de evaluación financiera. Y hay que entender, y ese es un proceso que es individual y de cada administradora, que como cada una de ellas va a evaluar el impacto en su portafolio e individualmente de cada una de las inversiones de las variables ESG y de cambio climático. Tenemos claro que esas variables pueden afectar el valor intrínseco de los activos y, por lo tanto, ocupamos la supervisión basada en riesgo porque fue, ¿cierto?, el acercamiento por riesgo que estamos haciendo. Además de gobernanza, se exige que la empresa tenga una visión sobre el tema. Entonces, de los 4 factores, ¿no?, del TCFD, que es gobernanza, estrategia, gestión de riesgo y objetivos y métricas, de esta forma estamos ya atacando 2 de ellas, que es la gobernanza y el manejo de riesgo. Además, es muy importante que los afiliados entiendan cómo cada administradora maneja los riesgos a que ellos están expuestos. Por eso tiene que estar en la política de inversión, porque es un documento público que las personas pueden ver cómo están manejando. Y tenemos claro que un mal manejo de los riesgos afecta directamente a cada uno de los afiliados, ¿cierto? La materialización de un riesgo es algo que afecta el portafolio de forma importante, o la empresa por el aspecto reputacional, ¿cierto? ¿Cómo vamos a seguir? Entonces, en términos de regulación, hay una mesa que ya fue mencionada acá, de los reguladores, dentro del Grupo de Trabajo de Finanzas Verdes, que es liderado por el Ministerio de Hacienda. Esperamos que, tenemos claro que durante este año se va a hacer, ¿cierto?, varios cambios normativos y ajustes para formalizar, ¿cierto?, mucho de lo que ya estamos trabajando y dejar explícito, pero principalmente lo que debemos hacer es incluir, ¿cierto? Eso ya está de alguna forma como un oficio, pero incluir los criterios ESG y cambio climático dentro de los contenidos mínimos de la política de inversión, agregando además buenas prácticas para el tratamiento de estos y formalizando dentro de la resolución de la SBR cómo debería ser el tratamiento de los riesgos. En el mediano plazo, ¿cierto?, deberíamos ir siendo cada vez más estrictos en la forma de fiscalizar eso dentro del proceso de inversión, porque eso tiene una curva de aprendizado para todas las personas, todos los agentes, ¿cierto?, tanto nosotros como nuestros fiscalizados. Y además estamos coordinando con los demás reguladores del sistema financiero para que la información sea cada vez más valiosa para los agentes de mercado, de forma que se pueda hacer un análisis completo, no solo del impacto de cada una de las empresas en el ambiente, pero del ambiente en las empresas, ¿cierto? Ese es un modelo muy importante de tener en mente. Para finalizar y dejar espacio a las consultas, ¿cierto? Primero, el tratamiento del riesgo. El tratamiento correcto de los riesgos y de cualquier riesgo es un deber de las administradoras. Y es nuestro deber exigir que las administradoras mejoren continuamente sus procesos. El tratamiento de los factores ESG y los riesgos del cambio climático se puede dar de diferentes formas. Hay múltiples soluciones. Y nosotros, como reguladores, no debemos definir cómo hacerlo. Eso es parte de los principios de la administración privada. Cada una debe encontrar la forma de hacerlo. Lo que nosotros debemos considerar es que esto sea suficiente y debidamente informado. Y el acceso, por lo tanto, a la información y que sea de calidad es esencial, ¿cierto? Por eso es tan importante modelos de divulgación que de alguna forma creen criterios homogéneos para que se pueda comparar y facilitar el tratamiento por parte de los inversionistas y principalmente cuando estamos hablando de portafolios tan complejos como son los de las administradoras de fondos de pensión. Quería ser breve porque encuentro que es importante tener espacio para consultas. Y ahí estamos.
Bueno, gracias Sergio por tu interesante presentación. Ahora abrimos un espacio para que Sergio responda a las consultas que nos fueron llegando por el chat y por interno. Y voy a partir con uno, solo para reflexionar un poco de la presentación de David antes. ¿Cómo están pensando quizás replicar algunas de las mejores prácticas que hemos visto en otros países a nivel internacional?
Yo creo que, como mencionó David también, la idea es siempre empezar con un proceso que sea voluntario, que cada administradora vaya entendiendo la importancia, agregando criterios, mejorando la forma de hacer las cosas y con eso también podemos parametrizar mejor nuestro sistema de regulación. Tenemos además una organización internacional que es la IOPS, de los supervisores de fondos de pensión, que el año pasado publicó los lineamientos para el tratamiento de los temas referentes al cambio climático, que nos da bastante soporte a lo que estamos haciendo. Entonces, estamos buscando dentro de la experiencia internacional la forma de ir desarrollando y básicamente, después de un proceso voluntario, es pasar a ser cada vez más riguroso y si hay necesidad, digamos así, hacerlo menos voluntario, es decir, poner un poco más de obligaciones dentro del proceso.
Gracias. Y bueno, explicaste bastante bien cómo la participación de la Superintendencia de Pensiones en la Mesa Público-Privada de Finanzas Verdes y sus planes para el corto y mediano plazo. Sería interesante escuchar como la visión de largo plazo, qué viene en el futuro en cuanto a la participación de esa mesa.
Yo creo que ese es un proceso que por naturaleza es largo, porque tenemos mucho aprendizado en términos científicos que se está desarrollando y los diferentes impactos. La visión del cambio climático basada en las emisiones nos va a probablemente derivar en un futuro a otros tipos de impactos que tenemos en el planeta. Entonces, yo creo que empezamos con el cambio climático, seguiremos probablemente con aguas. Tenemos varios caminos que este planeta debe seguir y nosotros vamos aprendiendo y va a ser un proceso mutatis mutandis, es decir, a medida en que vayamos encontrando las diferentes barreras en términos ambientales y climáticos, nosotros vamos encontrando las formas de tratarlas. No tenemos todas las soluciones y no tenemos todas las variables. Entonces, los modelos son muy complejos, la forma de tratar los resultados también lo son, y nosotros deberíamos ir desarrollando esta mesa a medida que tengamos cada vez más claras las soluciones. En este momento, y la forma como está, tenemos un problema urgente que es la emisión de carbono. Tenemos un problema urgente que es la transformación del clima en todo el planeta. Entonces, este trabajo lo estamos haciendo con la seriedad que merece. Pero yo creo que esta mesa tiene que ser permanente para ir siempre aprimorando. Estamos en una curva de aprendizado que, aunque sea rápida, vamos a tener el planeta también siendo transformado y entregando nuevas informaciones. Creo que es muy importante mantenerla, es muy importante la coordinación que está haciendo el Ministerio de Hacienda y es muy importante que estén no solo los reguladores, pero también todos los agentes de mercado, coordinando también con el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, que está haciendo un trabajo importante por ahí.
Sí, y bueno, y como David también mencionó en su presentación, la participación de la sociedad civil también en el caso del Reino Unido fue bastante clave. Así que voy a una pregunta que nos llegó por el chat. ¿Crees que es posible un futuro que la superintendencia sugiera a las AFP las recomendaciones del TCFD?
Creo que eso viene naturalmente por la adopción del TCFD a nivel global. Los diferentes patrones de información tienen sutiles diferencias que pueden hacer su comparación complicada. Entonces, es importante estar abierto al patrón que sea estándar y trabajar con él, porque en este caso es muy importante tener la comparabilidad y que se pueda componer. El TCFD tiene esas facilidades, el TCFD tiene muchas cosas positivas y una metodología muy clara. Entonces, creo que es un modelo muy importante. Pero
Perfecto, bueno, gracias.
hacerlo mandatory creo que es un poco más, es un paso más allá de lo que estamos ahora. Es algo que siempre se debe evaluar, pero hoy no habría la necesidad de hacerlo.
Perfecto. Bueno, gracias Sergio de nuevo y por temas de tiempo vamos a ir cerrando el webinar de hoy. Y para concluir esta jornada invitamos a Jacqueline Morillo, asesora de la Coordinación de Finanzas Internacionales del Ministerio de Hacienda, a realizar una reflexión de los contenidos revisados en este webinar. Jacqueline. Oh, no te escuchamos, ahí sí. ¿Ahora? No, todavía no. Siéntate una vez más. No. Bueno, actualmente parece que estamos con algunos problemas técnicos con el micrófono de Jacqueline. Pero con esto damos por concluido el cuarto encuentro del ciclo de webinars TCFD en relación con factores ACG. Les recordamos que la grabación de este encuentro se encontrará en los próximos días en mfbcorta.hacienda.cl. También aprovechamos esta instancia para invitarlos al próximo evento sobre tipos y gestión de riesgo climático, una mirada macroprudencial. El próximo webinar es el miércoles 15 de julio. Agradecemos mucho a todos por su asistencia de hoy y espero que tengan un muy buen día. Muchas gracias.